Adesso io passo la parola a un Vice President di Gartner che ci farà vedere la visione di Gartner sul bimodal IT. In particolare do il benvenuto a Andrew Butler, quindi Andrew, come on, che attraverso la loro visione ci farà capire il futuro dell'IT. Thank you, Andrew.
Many thanks, Neil. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a fantastic forum, I think, for us to have this day. And I feel as though Gianni and Werner have set me up very well in terms of sort of presenting this concept that we have inside Gartner that we call bimodal IT. And indeed, I don't think there is another vendor that has embraced the principles of bimodal IT quite as enthusiastically as Red Hat has so far. So, you know, what has impressed us is that this is a company that is determined to, as Werner was stressing, embrace the change without abandoning what was there before. And in the short time I have with you, I'll try to sort of point out that this is a challenge for all of us. I'll talk about this concept of these two different modes. And the reality is that it's a translation for all of us to move to this new concept. We're all mode 1 people, and we're all having to go through some degree of transformation. Most of you in this room will be users, consumers of IT, but of course outside the room we have many people selling IT products, IT services. We're all going through that journey. So perhaps a good way to start is with some bad news, which is, we think this is right upon us, and we think that most of us are going to get it wrong. So this is not going to be an easy transformation for the industry to take. Now, the imagery here may seem a little strange. In English, we have all sorts of odd words to describe different animals coming together. Maybe the same thing happens in Italian as well. These are starlings. And when dozens, hundreds, thousands of starlings gather together, we call it a murmuration in English. And indeed, they create amazing patterns as these creatures basically move from A to B in a degree of symmetry. And we think the IT industry is kind of about to go through this murmuration, that we are hanging on the end, where the bird's sitting on the telegraph pole, waiting for the opportunity and the courage to basically move to this new reality. But it's not going to be easy for all, and a lot of mistakes will be made. Although again, as I'll try to emphasize in the next sort of 20, 30 minutes, mistakes actually are sometimes a good thing in the place you're going, where they are a bad thing in the place you're coming from. So we've created this creature that we call bimodal IT, and as the name suggests, it's about creating effectively a parallel ecosystem where you're able to have what you know and what you trust, and that we will call mode 1. So this is the traditional IT that we have spent 20 or 30 years trying to get right. And then this concept of mode 2 is this more disruptive, emerging ecosystem that is right in its infancy today, but which we believe will become stronger and stronger and eventually will consume mode 1, but that's some way away. And the reason why it's important is that a one-size-fits-all approach will be very, very difficult to do. Even worse, many organizations, because we all have familiarity in mode 1, many organizations will just say, what could go wrong? I've learned to be really good at implementing my mode 1 ecosystem, or I'm a vendor who is very, very good at selling mode 1 infrastructure. I will just wrap a veneer of mode 2 readiness around what I have and apply it to mode 2. And these are the people who are going to get it wrong. These are the people who will struggle. So yes, eventually we will have one. Eventually, that sort of middle ground that Werner is building with his colleagues will create that bridge between Mode 1 and Mode 2, but it has to come in an organic way. It is not going to happen overnight, and while that bridge is coming together, we have to learn to sort of cope with two very different behaviors in the way that we use IT. So I'll go through a very quick history here, and Gianni sort of touched upon this, as did Werner. We know that this is an industry that goes through multiple generations of technology adoption. And, you know, some people will sort of mostly relate their working history to the right-hand side of the chart, and a few of us will be able to sort of go much further towards the left in looking at that history. The fact is, this is an industry that is continuously seeking to reinvent itself, and it goes through these multiple technology evolutions. And we go through lots of them. They may only take 5 or 10 years to go through these generational shifts. And I think we would all agree that the pace of those shifts is accelerating. So while we might say today we're in this mobile and cloud era, we don't exactly know what's going to come after that era. What we do know, though, is we're not going to have to wait very long. So the gap between, say, mobile and cloud and tomorrow is probably going to be a lot shorter than the gap between that PC era and mobile and cloud. And the problem is, we've learned to cope with this, but we can't change. Well, that's a bit of a bummer, isn't it? Should we run screaming from the room, or what's the recommendation? Okay. I guess we won't run screaming from the room, but if I see any smoke, you can follow me out. So, the fact is, bimodal IT isn't really about technology. It isn't about mainframes giving way to Unix, giving way to x86, giving way to some kind of mobile ecosystem. Bimodal IT is really about the politics of IT. It's about the culture, the social aspect of IT, and the way that IT organizations, they can't change every 5 minutes as some fantastic new toy comes along that we can embellish into our ecosystem. We can't change ourselves quite as quickly as that. So we actually think that there's only 3 eras or generations of how we run IT so far. So again, a few dinosaurs in the room will sort of think back to this very first era, you know, when it wasn't really called IT, where the role of the computer organization was to hide itself away as much as possible. I mean, I've lived my whole career in IT, and although I was a programmer back then, I never saw the computer. You know, I passed cards through a window, and a day later I got a report. It was always a written report, and that was as close as I ever got to the way that actually IT was administered. It was completely hidden away. It made itself as mysterious as possible. And clearly, that era died. So we've already gone through a bimodal shift as we went from this craftsmanship era to what we would call the industrialization era that we're in now. So we've spent 20, 30 years creating the middle of this chart, and we've got pretty good at it. And we like to think that we are in tune with our customers. But who are our customers? For most IT organizations, the customers are actually the other lines of business within the company or the government agency or whoever the larger organization is. The real customers, the people who buy the airline tickets, the people who want to switch on their water supply, the people who want to actually consume banking services, we don't see much of them in the IT structure we've created for the middle of this chart. And now we see ourselves moving to the right-hand side of the chart, where truly everyone within our broad organization must be a true partner, and we focus on the real customers rather than considering the lines of business and procurement and these other people to be the customers we have in the middle. So bimodal now is about going from the middle to the right. We have been there before, but most of us either weren't around then or we can't remember it. But the reality is this is the transition we're about to go through. And it's going to be an interesting journey. So if we think about what the ecosystem today looks like, we would say, what have we spent the 20 years creating? We've created a very solid, robust IT ecosystem, but it doesn't move very fast, and that's why you'll see us use this marathon runner concept, that we've created an IT ecosystem designed around durability. Nothing must go wrong. We get punished when things go wrong. We try to create an IT ecosystem which is absolutely perfect, and when things occasionally do fail, we try to recover as fast as we possibly can. And we spend a lot of time and a lot of money making that happen. So it creates an ecosystem that is extremely reliable and trustworthy, but that makes it very cumbersome. You know, things move slowly, and that is a challenge in this modern world we're moving into. Because when we think of mode 2, this new ecosystem, everything's got to move much more quickly. People need to be able to design and implement and consume the, let's call it a service they're creating, in a matter of hours or days or weeks, not the months and years that were typical in the era of mode 1. And this is why we use this concept of a sprinter to describe what we have to become. Sprinters are really great at running for 100 meters, 200 meters, and then they can just lie on the ground and basically have a rest for the next hour or two. Whereas the marathon runners, they've got to run for 26 miles, and so each 100-meter dash doesn't really make a lot of difference. They have to just work their way through and be very, very durable. And it comes together in this chart that obviously a variation of this chart Gianni showed. I obviously got very nervous there because he spent quite a lot of time on this chart and I couldn't understand what he was saying. So I will have to assume that he's already done much of the job of presenting the arguments here. But the fact is the two confusing, conflicting ecosystems really come together in this single graphic. And for me, you know, the important ones are, it's all about reliability on the left. It mustn't go wrong. You will be beaten if it goes wrong. On the right, it's okay to get it wrong every now and then. You know, it's a bit like riding a bike. Everything you know about riding a bike, you learned the last day you fell off, because you were punished for falling off, but you learned how to not fall off again. And we have to move to a culture where we are willing to screw it up once, and hopefully in a fairly minor way, because this will empower us to be able to create the resilience on the right-hand side of this chart. What is also crucial is, as we get down towards the bottom, this concept of taking months and years. You know, in mode 1, you spend months thinking about what we're going to do, you spend a year or two building it, and you want it to last a decade. Well, in the mode 2 we know now, you'll spend minutes or hours thinking about it, a few more hours building it, and it may only need to be live for a week or two. Indeed, as we move to Internet of Things, an operational technology meeting information technology, you won't be the one building and running the mode 2 applications. The machines will build and run those applications, and their lifespans may be minutes or even seconds. A very, very conflicting, different world. So, how do we get there? What changes to make mode 2 happen? Pretty well everything. So you can look at every aspect of your IT ecosystem, and you're going to have to reinvent it sometimes. You're going to have to make parallel investments, whether it is, you know, large scale-up server infrastructures, moving to maybe more nimble scale-out infrastructures, big expensive storage SANs, moving to some kind of software-defined storage future. When it comes to operations, you're all experts in ITIL and ISO standards, whereas now it's moving more to a DevOps kind of model. Everything has to change as you go towards this new reality. So a lot of people then say, well, what the hell does a Mode 2 workload look like? We can identify, I think, the workloads. We can think these are classic, most public cloud, most hybrid cloud, most big data analytics. We can think of Mode 2 people. A typical person leaving university today is going to be far more naturally capable of embracing the concepts of Mode 2 than perhaps I have been, because I've been around for a while. And, a lot of talk is done of these organizations. We saw many of these organizations coming up, the Ubers, the Airbnbs. I have seen Werner present a slide himself where he looked at the top 10 IT companies by capitalization in 2005, and I think 9 of those by 2015 had either declined or gone. And the fact is, the companies that replaced them, the Amazons, the Tencents, the Alibabas, the Googles, these are classic Mode 2 companies in everything about the way they run. The other reality is Mode 1 and Mode 2 can coexist. In fact, they have to learn to coexist. A simple example is an ATM machine. When you go to the ATM machine, you want to know exactly how much money you've got in your account, right down to the nearest cent or penny. And so that is a classic, reliable, trustworthy Mode 1 workload. Then, though, you say, that's great, give me a large amount of money. And this is where the ATM machine shifts gears, where it moves from Mode 1 to Mode 2, because this is where it has to take a risk. It has to say, has he really got all that money? The machine thinks maybe he went to another machine 200 meters down the road and he took out nearly all the money he has, and that transaction has not yet hit my mothership central computer, and so this guy isn't really worth 3,000 or 4,000 euros. He's only got 20 euros, and he's asking me to now give him another 1,000. So the reality is that you can surround Mode 1 with Mode 2, and that will be the way that many organizations actually start to create their bridge between the old and the new. So let's have just a few minutes on how do we make this happen. Nobody should leave this room and start redesigning their core banking systems around embracing Mode 2 in its entirety. We don't need SANs, we don't need mainframes, we don't need highly reliable operating systems, virtualization layers, the things we've spent a decade or more investing in. What you should be looking for, though, is a suitable guinea pig for basically learning how to start making this transition. Looking for some new identifiable project, maybe looking for enthusiasts within your organization who may already actually be going down some of these paths. I would say many of you are probably actually already implementing Mode 2 kinds of projects or Mode 2 thinking. You just don't know it yet. Quite often, the advocates, the pioneers, will be in your midst. And because they do not feel valued or approved in the way that they're, this renegade thinking, they will suppress this. They will do what they're doing quietly. So the key is be open. Look for the opportunities, and you might identify them yourself. You may be able to sort of find the candidates within the broader organization, but they will exist. And you should be doing it now. Don't wait until you're ready, because then you never will be ready. The reality is there will be those projects. They don't have to be huge. They have to be projects where you are maybe willing to make some mistakes. They're probably not instantly business critical, but they may become business critical over time. And imagine, as I say, how you find those pioneers within your own organization. Encourage a culture that allows those people to, I was going to say come out, but maybe that's not an appropriate term, but you know what I mean by this. They don't have to hide amongst your infrastructure. They need to be rewarded for the innovative thoughts they're capable of bringing. And there are many sort of methodologies that organizations can use to help make this happen. You know, the Americans come up with all kinds of different sort of terms and techniques to, you know, basically encourage these people to congregate together. Don't forget, going back to our first slide, they are the murmuration. They're the starlings standing on the telegraph pole, and you need to group them together, and you need to allow them to learn from each other and basically express that agility. And then over time, you can move more towards the right-hand side of this chart. You can use the hopefully positive results from those early lighthouse island projects to say, we tried it, it worked, we saved some money, we created a degree of agility our normal business process would not have allowed. That is what you will need to get the people in the board, to get the people in the lines of business to buy in to what you're trying to do. It will not happen overnight. And obviously, you can work with the various vendors you work with, whether it is Red Hat from a sort of a infrastructure ecosystem point of view. Many of the hardware vendors will be embracing this trend. You know, you can basically, it's in everyone's interest to understand where are people getting it right and to learn from their experiences, but also to learn from where they get it wrong. That way, it's even better if you can learn to ride the bike, but you don't actually fall off yourself, your friend falls off. That's really, really good if you can achieve that kind of reality. The other comment was made that, you know, Mode 1 isn't going away. You know, Werner said it'll be with us for a long, long time, and it absolutely will. Eventually we'll wake up and we'll go, what was that Mode 1 stuff? And we'll realize that without knowing it, we have morphed into Mode 2 creatures. But it's not going to happen for another 10 or 15 years. So we've got to learn to coexist. And where are you going to get the money to do all that Mode 2 investment? Because your budgets probably are not going up 20, 30, 40% a year. They're probably flat or growing very little. So Mode 1 improvements will pay for Mode 2 to happen. So you have to continue consolidating, rationalizing, refining the infrastructure you have. All of the initiatives around having maybe more modern servers, moving to virtualization where it makes sense, migrating maybe older legacy workloads to the likes of Linux will make a lot of sense. And indeed, if we look at this, you know, new collaboration between Red Hat and Microsoft, we actually think that it's going to have much of its immediate impact in this slide, in the ability for these two giants who, you know, the reality is I never have an inquiry with a client saying I'm migrating from Windows to Linux or I'm migrating from Linux to Windows. Both Red Hat and Microsoft have achieved a significant degree of success in the market in parallel with each other. Yes, they fight for the new business and they will continue to fight for the new business, but what you have is once people make their business decision, and you have to hope they make the right business decision, they are then today either in a Java Linux silo of usage or in a Microsoft .NET silo of usage. If those two silos can learn to actually coexist a little bit better together, they don't hurt each other because the competition's already been done. And that's why we believe the potential upsides of this alliance are huge, because it will help to make this chart happen. So coming up to the end, the key is profiling everything you have. People, workloads, investments you've got. You can't just chuck everything away. You have to look at the way you're depreciating the existing IT assets you have and understand, does it fit in the upward triangle or the downward triangle? They both have a role. There's a strong correlation between what we call bimodal IT and what is often called pace layering. And many vendors like IBM use this concept of pace layering to again present their own argument, where you effectively, in pace layering, you normally have 3 categories, and where you would, you talk about this concept of a system of record, where the system of record, is these highly robust, resilient workloads, always business critical, where they're highly resistant to change and they need a huge amount of governance. And then at the other extreme, you get this concept of where change must be built in to the actual architecture of the workload, and where therefore you cannot allow a huge amount of policing of the way the workload is run. So very much we're not condemning or sort of denying this concept of pace layering. We're trying to simplify it by saying we know there's a top, we know there's a bottom. If you like, a lot of what Werner was presenting was, vendors like Red Hat creating the middle. So the bottom line is, don't wait until you're ready, because you never will be. Start now. At the very least, think about what you would do. I've thrown a huge amount at you, for which I apologize, but hopefully Red Hat will provide copies of all these slides. Understand that Mode 1 will poison Mode 2, given the opportunity. Mode 2 needs to be able to grow and be nurtured in its own way. It is different, it is weird, and it has to be applauded for its weirdness, and Mode 1 will resist that weirdness because we've spent 20 years conditioning ourselves to act in that way. And understand how that middle ground, that bridge between the two, will come from gradually building a management ecosystem, whether that's management through management tools, software products, or the management that goes on up here. It's all about creating that ability for these two very different worlds to coexist, and where over time, and allow it to be 5 or 10 or 15 years if necessary, depending on your organization, you will find a way to bring these two together. And inevitably you will, and then there'll be no such thing as Mode 1, because we will have all made the transition to Mode 2. And those of you who are still working then in 20, 30 years' time, someone else will stand up and probably claim they've invented bimodal IT, because the cycle can start all over again. Okay, that is it. I've tried to bring it in on time. Thank you very much for your time. I won't run away.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
So, if anyone wants to sort of catch me over lunch or in a break, more than happy to have a chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much for your speech. Thank you.